good evening to each one of you. On behalf of the Bangalore Chamber of Industry and Commerce, we welcome each one of you to this session on book reading, diversity beyond tokenism. Why being politically correct does not help anyone. This session has been organized under the aegis of the Human Resource and Women Empowerment Leadership Expert Committee of BCIC. We would like to specially thank Dr. Augustus, Chairman of the HR and Women Empowerment and Leadership Expert Committee of BCIC and HR Leader at IBM India South Asia, and also Ms. Lavanya, co-chairperson of the Human Resource Expert Committee of BCIC, for curating this session for the benefit of our members. The session for today's session is the speaker for today's session is Mr. T.N. Hari, co-author of the book and CHRO of Big Basket. The session will be moderated by Mr. Augustus, who is the chairman of the HR and Women Empowerment Leadership Expert Committee of BCIC. We would also like to thank all the participants for joining in today's session. We request all of you to kindly mute your mic and webcam option. This is to enhance and keep the bandwidth strong, as well as avoid any disturbance in the background. Please post your questions in the chat box only. The speaker will respond to the question during the session. And also raise your hand in case you want to ask any questions in this regard. May I now invite our president, Mr. T.R. Parshuram, to do the welcome of the gathering. Over to you, President, sir.
Yeah, very good evening. Thanks, Prithvi. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I extend a very hearty welcome to Mr. Hari, the CHRO of Big Basket. And I congratulate again Lavanya for bringing up this wonderful program. I think this session, I would say, is a great feast to all the HR leaders. Not only HR leaders, all corporate leaders. I understand this just talks about diversity as a kind of way of life to enable prosperous businesses and not just as a kind of monotonous activity. I think today we need that kind of a rich diversity. I think this out-of-box thinking is very much required. In fact, today I was reading some stories of Japan. Today, one of the big challenges of Japan is the aging population. And those days of Nagasaki and Hiroshima, the people used to really build their nation and bring it to a kind of superpower, knowledge power, and industrial power. Some senior people are worried because people are taking a very easy life. And one of the reasons they don't have children also. So the scholarly articles quote, the root cause of this current challenge is also lack of diversity, especially participation of women in very senior positions and corporates. So just I was reading this article, somebody shared that article with me. So I'm able to recollect, I think the diversity in every area is an extension of creativity and innovation. In fact, you look beyond and, sky is not the limit. And, how to view this beautiful big picture of the Earth at 1,000 kilometers above sea level. Maybe the Amazon CEO would have had that glimpse today morning. So I think you should be able to put it in your pocket. I think diversity is one that is a very, very significant thing that can really shake or make or break an organization. Because the diversity for the right purpose and diversity with the right strategy could create miracles in the organization. And today we have a big challenge. So the mindset of organizations are very strong. And especially I could see this kind of mindset in the manufacturing scenarios. Because what we talked 4 years back, at least 3 years back, somebody talked about work from home for manufacturing organizations. It was a kind of a nightmare or a myth. People would laugh at me. Today it has become a reality. And we are able to save billions of dollars in travel across the globe. As Toyota, I can tell you that, every month we used to have our conference in Australia or Bangkok or in Japan. Today, we are not traveled for the last couple of years. It's the 9th wonder of the world on a real platform, but it is a reality. Therefore, I think this book I could see can really be a kind of wake-up call, and it can really bring that kind of a paradigm shift required for all the thought leaders beyond barriers. So I congratulate Hari for co-authoring this book for a greater purpose. And I'm happy that today Bangalore Chamber of Industry and Commerce members are able to listen from the horse's mouth on this book. Once again, I really congratulate Agi and Lavanya for bringing this wonderful event. And I wish you a wonderful session and a lot of takeaways. Thank you.
Thank you, President Sir, for the wonderful welcome address.
Thank you
May
so
I now
much for
invite,
that word.
yeah, Dr. Augustus to take over, sir. Set the context, today's subject, and also moderate the session, sir. Thanking you all once again.
Thank you so much, Prithvi. Thank you, Prithvi, and thank you, Mr. President. And It's a great afternoon to do a book reading. As I look out my window, it's green outside, drizzling, and I'm just waiting for a hot cup of coffee to keep me company while we journey alongside Hari. I was wondering what I should say in terms of introducing Hari. If I have to make a list of one of the 10 most interesting people you must meet in life, Hari will be one of those persons on that list. Feel free to connect with Hari, ask him questions. He comes with a very clear and fresh perspective to various things in this particular topic of diversity beyond tokenism and why being politically correct doesn't help anybody. And Briefly about Hari, he started his career as an engineer with Tata Steel, working on the shop floor for about 11 years. And then he spent 3 years in HR transformation by the time India was ready for its post liberalization era, the bounty of which we are seeing now. And then the next 18 years, he went away to five growth startups. And some of them are very well known startups. Daksh was one which got acquired by IBM, Virtusa, I think, by NASDAQ, and then Amba Research. Taxi for sure, which was the other one, which was acquired by Ola. And Hari played a very key role in growing these startups and then exiting them successfully. And then in the last 5 years, his interest has been as an advisor, mentor, and venture partner to startups. And then his passion for writing, where he is now authored close to 5 books, is what I hear. And he's passionate about solving problems and building organizations for scale. So that's about our speaker as well as author T.N. Hari. And if you are finding any of your friends missing, but for whom this program is going to be interesting, please share the link. Even if it is late, let them come and join us because this is a very interesting program. It is free format. Hari will read excerpts from his book, and then we will discuss some of those things. We'll give ideas, suggestions, advice, and then, of course, takeaways. I'll stop here, turn it over to TN Hari.
Thank you, Augustus Augie, and thank you, Mr. Parashuraman, for having me over. It's such a pleasure speaking to all of you. And this is a book that we have written with a lot of passion. And those who know me know that I don't pull any punches. I call a spade a spade. I speak my mind. And this book, is a bit of a bold and unconventional book. And we have been a bit critical of the lazy drivel on this subject. And we have written this from a very commonsensical perspective. So the approach is not one of we know it all or how great diversity is, how powerful diversity is, as much as asking many of the difficult questions that are often ignored. So that really is the focus of this book. What I will do is I will just read bits and pieces of this book from different chapters. Stuff I hope that will create enough interest for you to deep dive into this topic and maybe even have some discussion. So let me just begin by reading a little bit. So the idea of this book was love at first sight, an emotion writers are far too familiar with when we are consumed by the intellectual challenge of a subject that we can't take our mind off it. It wasn't the idea of diversity per se that excited us. It was the idea of relooking at diversity that made both of us feel instantly that this book was meant to be. Herein lies the core essence of what this book is and isn't about. It's not a discourse on why diversity is important. The book rather seeks to explore, does it matter? Why do we care? Is it worth the effort? And as we wrote in the chapter, does diversity really help business? Assuming diversity always helps or always hurts is incorrect. It is important to understand the business context and structure before weaving in diversity. As we explored how this book could evolve, we both of us realized we had been witnessing the diversity saga. And herein lies why we wrote this book in the first place. If organizations are a microcosm of the society, then diversity should be a natural part of it. However, the manner in which businesses are implementing diversity is rife with tokenism. We re-looked at diversity using first principles. In that spirit, we have used questions as the tool of choice to explore how diversity could be approached within organizations. As we asked in the chapter Discrimination and Diversity, is the narrative on discrimination driven by a reasoned voice, or are we drowning ourselves in reactive noise? The question was driven by concerned skepticism on how much businesses feel pressured to act in a certain way by social media outrage, and how much that really serves to remove discrimination in the long term in the first place. The process of writing this book was a lot like performing a precision surgery, having to take apart several intricately linked, seemingly paradoxical aspects of diversity. We had to make our arguments with care, constantly checking if one aspect contradicted the other. We observed how perspectives that were seemingly at odds with one another were essential parts of the whole that we call diversity. Hence, while we argued in favor of affirmative action for women in the chapter Does Diversity Really Help Business? We explored the principle of absolute equality in the chapter Equal Not Same, and the need to address unspoken apprehensions of managers in holding women professionals accountable for non-performance. On one hand, in the chapter Women in Senior Management, we highlighted how women are bound by traditional gender roles to keep their careers on the back burner and the need for that to change. On the other hand, in the chapter Discrimination and Diversity, we pressed upon organizational solutions for managers hesitating to hire women instead of shaming and penalizing the apparently discriminatory behavior. Addressing each of these aspects individually may have been easier, but arguing all the questions together in one book required us to understand carefully how each vein, artery, and the nerve of diversity interacted with the other. If diversity has to be discussed beyond tokenism, we cannot avoid understanding these complex interrelations. Our attempt has been to make that complexity simpler, discernible, and amenable to an informed discussion among all stakeholders as it should be, and not just remain the bastion of diversity experts. It has taken a lot to write this book: time, painstaking effort, and intense reflection. Most importantly, it has taken courage. We did not write this book as experts. In fact, we would go a step further to say this book could not have been written by experts, because as experts, we would already have committed ourselves to a point of view. Our focus would have been to tell, not ask. Our compulsion would have been to be politically correct. In the chapter Dissent and Diversity, we shared the story of Ray Dalio, whose business fall taught him to transition from I am right to how do I know I am right. That's the question we have asked ourselves several times while writing this book. In the chapter Me Too, we played devil's advocate to the idea that including women necessarily means reducing sexual harassment. We asked the never asked question on the subject: can women perpetuate, aid, and abet sexual harassment? In the chapter Ideological Echo Chamber, we pointed at the shaky grounds of popular diversity reports by the likes of McKinsey. Through the book, we have looked at what appears to be double-edged, double-standard approach of admired companies such as Unilever, Google, and Zappos. None of these are with the object of criticism, which would be unhelpful to overall objective of the book. We have taken the courage to do so in order to highlight that approaching diversity with tokenism leads even the best of organizations to act in a way that contradicts logic and their stated beliefs. We could not have explored these aspects from the lens of experts. We needed the courage to discard assumptions about diversity in popular narratives and see things for what they are. So, having called out the emperor without clothes, we have pointed at the elephant in the room. We have belled the proverbial cat. We have done so to clear the way for all stakeholders now to ideate and think about how really diversity can be implemented within organizations. For us, it was not just about writing a book. We wanted to have the courage to create a turning point in the discourse on diversity. So what I'll do now, I'll just pick some few lines from some chapters. One of the chapters is an ideological echo chamber. That's the first chapter. It starts with a quote: "The history of men's opposition to women's emancipation is more interesting than perhaps the story of that emancipation itself." Virginia Woolf, in her book A Room of One's View, of One's Own. In July 2017, James Damore, an employee at Google, published an internal memo claiming biological differences prevent gender equality. The memo, titled Google's Ideological Echo Chamber: How Biased Clouds Are Thinking About Diversity and Inclusion, resulted in a highly polarizing debate which went beyond the confines of Google. The contents led to outrage across Silicon Valley and reverberated around the world. It also triggered discussion on a contentious topic that had become overly sensitive and taken on the overtones of a religious doctrine. Google, known for its relatively open culture, after a swift investigation, said that Damore had violated the company's code of conduct and encouraged harmful gender stereotypes in our workplace. In less than a week of publishing the internal memo, James Damore was fired from Google. One can't help suspecting that the haste with which Google acted was a reflection of an intolerance for a point of view that did not fit a certain perspective or doctrine. The contents of the memo may have been the product of an inadequate understanding of a nuanced subject, but it certainly merited adhering, especially when feedback was explicitly sought by the company. Diversity is not just about gender, but also about dealing with multiplicity of viewpoints. Damore's memo was a perfect opportunity for dealing with questions that may have troubled many others who chose not to voice their concerns. Google's suppression of Damore's memo smacked of a shade of intolerance that is common in cults where there's no space for an alternate point of view. We'll circle back to this at the end of the chapter, but first of all, let's look at the validity of Damore's assertion. And then we use a lot of game theory and the butterfly effect to prove that James Damore was completely wrong. In a snarky summary at the start of the memo, Damore makes two rather sweeping conclusions. Differences in distributions of traits between men and women may in part explain why we don't have 50% representation of women in tech and leadership. And discrimination to reach equal representation is unfair, divisive, and bad for business, is what he said. We completely disagree with this. And we go on to prove this. The American Psychological Association, a publication of October 20, concluded that studies show that one's sex has little or no bearing on personality, cognition, and leadership. A 2005 analysis of 46 meta-analyses that were conducted during the last 2 decades underscores that men and women are basically alike in terms of personality, cognitive ability, and leadership. Therefore, we completely disagree with Damore. However, the interesting thing is that many proponents of gender diversity who disagreed with Damore have also argued that since there's not a shred of evidence from any credible research to conclude that there's an innate difference in the capabilities of the two genders, Damore's conclusions are wrong, which is correct. But they go on to ironically, many of these same individuals, proponents of gender diversity, argue that having gender diversity in leadership team increases the diversity of thought process and helps bring in perspectives which are different because men and women are different. So they say Damore is wrong because men and women are not seriously different. But they also say that bringing women and men as one team helps bring different perspectives. So there's a clear contradiction. You can't argue both ways based on convenience. If a hasty conclusion or stereotyping of one kind is faulty, misinformed, and harmful, then the reverse hasty conclusion is equally faulty. One doesn't need to justify gender on the grounds that it would justify diversity of perspectives. Can you, for a moment, imagine having to justify women's right to vote or women's right to education with an argument that it would promote diversity of political or academic discourse? Women have a right to vote and a right to education as much as men do, period. No justification is required. We'll then move to a next chapter where I'll just read a few paragraphs from there. Starts with a quote: "Good leadership requires you to surround yourself with people of diverse perspectives who can disagree with you without fear of retaliation." Doris Goodwin. Let's consider the McKinsey report, Why Diversity Matters. It was published in January 2015, and it starts with a line: "We know intuitively that diversity matters." To me, at the outset, by no stretch of imagination is it intuitive that diversity matters. Actually, on the contrary, diversity at the workplace conjures up images of conflict and disagreement with people from different backgrounds, ethnic, cultural, style, thinking, and education, arguing over different issues and struggling to build a consensus. Isn't it actually quite intuitive that if you've got a group of homogeneous people who all think alike, it's far easier to reach a consensus? Having people with different perspectives, different experiences, different opinions, and perhaps different working styles makes it much more difficult to agree on issues. In addition, people from different ethnic or cultural backgrounds can have varying opinions about religion. Therefore, the truth is that if diversity does indeed matter, it is extremely counterintuitive. Any truth of life that is counterintuitive needs to be explored and understood well. Without a deeper understanding, any change would either be faulty or rife with tokenism. Take the example of Michael Holmes, professor of strategic management at Florida State University. In an article, he writes, although companies led by men or women took similar levels of risks, those with women CEOs generated smaller investor returns. That's what he says. Now, it would be naive to conclude that companies run by women tend to generate lower returns for shareholders. In the same article, Holmes is intellectually honest to point out that women who become CEOs are often appointed to companies that are in a crisis or are performing poorly, as in the cases of Mary Barra at General Motors, Carly Fiorina at Hewlett Packard, Marisa Mayer at Yahoo. And therefore, it's more likely that the causation of lower returns is the nature of companies women are typically appointed to, and not the inherent incompetence of women CEOs, as the casual reading of the article may have fallaciously concluded. Popular literature on diversity and inclusion is full of unsubstantiated claims, often wrapped in impressive sounding empirical correlations and statements that sound politically correct. We find many companies using diversity and inclusion plans solely to get recognized on a top 100 diversity management list. As the title of this book implies, it's important that diversity goes beyond tokenism and we can ask honest questions without feeling compelled to be politically correct. Diversity in the workplace is far more complex than giving it epithets like good and bad, because both positive and negative effects follow diversity. A potential benefit is the increase in creativity, but the potential challenges include an increase in conflicts and a breakdown in communication. Just one more thought that we introduce and we talk a lot in detail. So many of the points that I'm talking about, I'm just leaving you with some things so that you feel more interested in pursuing those thoughts and reading. And we have written a lot of that in detail in the book. The next is something like the not like us syndrome. And one of the ways in which people get excluded, groups get excluded by other groups and other individuals is the not like us syndrome. I just talk about three types of companies. The first type of company is one that has a limited understanding of their own culture and hence an inadequate understanding of what really constitutes a culture fit. The second category of companies are those that have a good sense of their culture but are understated about it and don't necessarily deify it. The third category of companies are those that publicize and glorify their culture. It is the third category of companies that, according to us, have made culture seem like such a cool thing. From what we have seen, the aggressive pursuit of culture fit by the third category of companies can sometimes become the flip side of intolerance. Companies that vociferously advertise their culture are also communicating a degree of intolerance. If you see carefully, you would discover that these companies mostly flaunt their artifacts and not the deep underlying elements of what really constitutes culture. To some extent, these companies resemble cults, and cults have a tendency to augment and reinforce their identity with an almost authoritarian enforcement of the cult's beliefs and practices. And this goes against the grain of inclusion. We have addressed the nuances of culture fit and dissent in the chapter Diversity and Dissent. Companies that have truly cracked the culture code are those in the second category. They truly get what culture is, but they do not use it to exclude groups unlike those in the third category of companies. They take a balanced position and make the culture truly work for them. In fact, one of the biggest lessons in my career in managing cross-border, cross-cultural, globally distributed, multi-ethnic teams has been about the importance of ignoring or even maybe celebrating the artifact level differences, but striving for commonality on the real culture stuff. In fact, genuine respect and appreciation for the artifact level differences between each one of us creates stronger bonding and agreement around the more fundamental culture elements. Now, one little bit about affirmative action versus passive support. We've discussed this in great length. So when it comes to diversity, should companies take affirmative action? Does it mean that merit should be compromised even if it's just a little bit to accommodate a minority group? Should companies tweak the recruitment process to achieve diversity targets? Should companies even go about setting diversity targets? We think everything, so we've answered a lot of those questions in fair amount of detail in a very balanced way. We think everything else being the same, companies tend to become more committed to diversity when two conditions are met, when the complexity and geographical spread of the business grows, and when they go past the phase where they believe the organization will endure. And startups get to this phase of permanency after an acquisition by a larger company or becoming a public company. A little bit on a different chapter titled Dissent and Diversity. We must not confuse dissent with disloyalty. Edward Murrow. Zappos, the poster boy of organization culture, decided to adopt holacracy around 2013. What followed, ironically, was a my way or the highway situation. In early 2015, CEO Tony Hsieh gave an ultimatum to the employees in a memo to either align to the hierarchy-led structure or take the offer and leave. The attrition level of 2015 rose to 30%. However, the CEO did not seem too concerned by it. Interestingly, the company has since quietly backed out of this, which did not seem to have worked well as expected. What concerns us in this case of Zappos has got nothing to do with the structure per se. Our interest lies in examining the belief or the fact that a decision to make teams more self-managed had to be dealt with an iron hand. It's slightly odd that there's so much discussion around building diversity in organizations, yet so little conversation how to deal with dissent. Different points of view and ideas are inherent in the very definition of diversity. Disagreements are a natural consequence of those differences, requiring time and effort to resolve. It's nearly pointless to build diversity unless there is a conscious acceptance of dissent and defined processes to leverage it. Dissent unfortunately suffers a bad reputation. It's treated as disloyalty. Let's go back to the case of James Damore being fired from Google upon publishing his views on why women can't code because of biology. His case is particularly significant because his views pertain to an issue in the realm of diversity. The point here is not whether Damore was right or wrong. We have, of course, said that he was completely wrong. However, that inadequacy was just the same as anyone else's arguments at Google, arriving at an equally simplistic, though favorable conclusion about women. Further, Damore criticized Google for its politically correct monoculture. The memo was considered to be such a crisis that Sundar Pichai had to cut short a vacation that he was on and had to return to deal personally with it. Irrespective of any flaws in Damore's memo, the haste and zealousness with which he was fired is a standing testimony to the discomfort organizations have in general with dissent. A pro-diversity argument often made is that it enables organizations to survive uncertainty and ambiguity. The rationale for this argument is that unforeseen situations require unusual approaches, which is made possible by a diverse workforce. If this be the case, it's inherent in the very argument that organizations investing in diversity need to be able to survive in uncertainties must also be prepared to make space for dissent. We'll now just move to a different topic, which is discrimination and diversity. Serena Williams' penalty that cost her the 2018 US Open title against Naomi Osaka for calling the umpire a liar and thief opened floodgates of sexism accusations. While the umpire was acting by the rule book, Williams cried foul that she was being punished harshly only because she was a woman while male players got away with worse behaviors. We've discussed this incident and what this means in great depth. That Williams was returning after pregnancy into a highly competitive and physically rigorous sport added to the heated debate. Critics of the penalty felt it took away an opportunity from Williams to create history. What is our definition of equality, and therefore how do we interpret discrimination? Secondly, while an individual person or organization should be held accountable for their own behaviors, can he or she, or should they be held accountable for and be expected to rectify the wrongs of historical, systemic, or societal discrimination? Reportedly, Carlos Ramos, the umpire who officiated the fateful Serena Osaka match, is known for being strict to male players as well. And therefore, the question to be asked is the narrative on discrimination driven by a reasoned voice, or are we drowning ourselves in reactive noise? Making a point here that discrimination is the very basis of management. The idea might seem preposterous on the face of it. However, a close look into how organizations discriminate at every stage will establish that far from being preposterous, this is actually the fact we all live by. In many jobs, we find organizations outrightly mention tier 1 colleges and schools only, denying anyone outside the bucket to even try. That's discrimination, but it's also a hiring strategy which is considered normal. For example, top investment banks only hire the top students of top colleges. Others don't even get a chance to try. Who is to say that someone with a lower score in these top colleges or one studying in a lower run college will not make a good eye banker? We all remember the movie, I think In Search of Happiness, In Pursuit of Happiness movies, where, he made a good eye banker even though he was not from a top college. We cannot expect organizations to be equal, therefore, but we can expect them to be fair. And here lies the key to dealing with discrimination in organizations, and that is organizations cannot be non-discriminatory. What they must strive for is to discriminate using fair and transparent principles. Our core points in this example is firstly that demonizing a discriminatory behavior neither tackles unfair discrimination nor enables diversity. People simply find a way around to do it secretly. Secondly, it's important to accept that discrimination in principle is the basis of doing business and we must make an allowance for it. It must begin with understanding that discrimination at workplace is not an agenda to serve as fodder for rallying and rhetoric. It's a problem of the most complex nature, which requires hardcore, practical, on-ground problem solving. One more point about equal pay for equal work. Is that the solution? This brings us to the question, which is what about the equity or inequity that exists today? A case in point is Grand Slam prize money for male and female tennis players. Over the years, major Grand Slams have announced equal prize money for male and female tennis players. However, the debate is far from over. Male players have continued to argue reasons of why they should get paid more than the female counterparts. Women should fight for what they think they deserve, and we should fight for what we think we deserve, is what Novak Djokovic said. How do we deal with this never-ending debate in every sector after sector? There is this debate. How do we deal with it? We just can't go out and say, equal pay, everyone should get paid the same. That's not necessarily an answer because then that'll hurt business in a big way. So merely promoting women, I'm jumping a little bit, So in the book, we've discussed that topic in detail. Now I'm probably moving to a different point, which is merely promoting women and other protected groups will not help in the long run. However, preparing them will. There's only so much female founder specific funding that can happen, but helping them learn new behaviors necessary for the domain is what will put them on an equal footing with male founders on a larger scale. There are disgruntled murmurs in organizations that affirmative action is another kind of discrimination and means a compromise on meritocracy. We have very strongly refuted these faulty arguments in the book. However, if affirmative action does not include capability building at a war footing and just continues with affirmative actions, then the naysayers will be proven right in the long run, hurting the cause of diversity and anti-discrimination. Some sections of diversity practitioners opine that hiring women who are successful as mothers and wives into leadership roles will help break the mindset that women have to choose between the two. The argument is flawed. Firstly, bringing more women into leadership itself requires time and effort. It's not simply a matter of giving more promotions, but first creating the pipeline of women leaders and senior management, where the dropouts are most visible. Secondly, how does one get more women who are married and who are mothers into leadership without creating a new bias against women who don't fit this description? So this approach therefore creates more problems than it solves. It's understandable, it's clearly understandable and required that there be conversation and action on making it easier for mothers to return to work and grow in their career. However, most organizations have limited their efforts to just that. As we see it, while it's necessary to create these support systems, a long term shift is required in allowing women's professional identity to exist independent of their personal roles in a way similar to men. We have explained in detail with illustrations what the statement means. The next chapter is one of them is women in senior management. Here's a quote: women meet more resistance and more isolation as they move up the ranks. Article after article, interview after interview reveals why. It's the impact of subtle implicit bias. Linda Decker. What's at the root of this imbalance? Based on what we have seen in the conversations we have had, we believe there are three broad heads under which we can find an explanation as to why there are so few women in top management. Home and family is the first one. Here, women carry the burden. Second, stereotyping and bias. Leadership is a man's job, is the belief, and vicious cycle at play. If things are bad and if left to themselves, they usually get worse. In other words, an uneven playing field gets even more uneven with time. We'll have taken each of these at length and written in great amount of detail what it means. It appears that under the current social setup, the nearly biggest determinant of a woman's career success is the choice she makes about her life partner and the quality of some of the subsequent conversations she engages in with him at the key points in her career. It's a cringeworthy thought, living in the times of women empowerment, that a woman's career is dependent on the husband's support, whether her support to the husband is taken, whereas her support to the husband is taken for granted. However, social systems and mindsets take a very long time to change. Women can accelerate that shift in status quo by making more conscious choices about who they marry, whether they marry, when they marry, and under what terms they marry. Proponents of diversity have suggested several steps to aid women in their careers, providing mentors, development opportunities, counseling, flexible working being some of them. Many of these interventions are often centered around women being advised and provided help to adopt or adapt to a male dominated environment rather than changing the male dominated environment. While some see these steps in the right as steps in the right direction, we believe they're tactical, incremental, and will not change the game in a significant way. And above all, they don't create a level playing field. They just help individual women navigate an unfair playing field a little better. Therefore, even if they succeed, the success is not sustainable because women end up losing their authenticity, giving up their femininity, and resembling the men. From what we have heard from women who've experienced these programs firsthand, we don't locking these women into a trap of hope and activity. Of your career advancement, you need to deal with it. There's no point complaining about it to anyone. And who can you complain about this to? If every time there's a parent teacher meeting, you are the one attending, every time your parents or in laws fall sick and you are the one taking them to the hospital, every time you are the one quitting when your job when your husband decides to relocate, then it's time you discuss this with the family. In fact, women making these choices consistently leads to stereotypes about hiring women professionals, which may seem like discrimination, but is a reflection of the social reality. While we have discussed how organizations can find solutions in the chapter Discrimination and Diversity, however, organizational interventions cannot change hardwired, deep-rooted social norms unless women, at least the ones who are educated and empowered, take the lead. So that's where I will conclude, but there are several other chapters in a great amount of detail. We've talked about, Me Too as such an, relevant and, current topic. We have discussed Me Too at great length. It's a very, very controversial topic, but very boldly we've discussed that. We've discussed topics like equal but not the same. We've talked a lot about how do you go beyond tolerance. We've talked about how bias is so pervasive. We've talked about, films, we've talked about literatures, we've even talked about, books like, Divakaruni's Mahabharata, which she has written, and I think it was Volga who wrote the book Liberation of Sita. Such wonderful feminist literature, the feminist movement in America, which all led to a lot of liberation that happened. So, and how it impacts the world of today. So my belief is that, if you don't understand the complete picture, you will never be able to take the right kind of decisions when it comes to diversity. You will then make the standard, you'll parrot the standard phrases, you will repeat the same things which are considered to be politically correct without understanding these issues are very deep rooted, very, very complex. If you go back to the women's rights movement, actually women's rights in the US, very interestingly, they were more backward than India until 1964. They got relatively liberated, even on paper, only with the passing of the Civil Rights Bill in 1964. And sex discrimination on gender was included only at the last minute. Otherwise, it was, no discrimination based on race, ethnicity, everything else. But gender was included only after pressure from the feminists. And the feminist movement is such an interesting thing. Just look at it, right? Women are not a minority, unlike the blacks, unlike, many places, Jews in India, maybe the Muslims, the Buddhists, they are minorities. Christians, they're minorities. But women are not a minority. So how do they even agitate? Women's lives are locked into the lives of men folks in so many different ways. For example, men who are married, women who are married to blacks, black women who are married to blacks, their lives are tied, irretrievably to the black males. How do those black women who have sufferings that are common with white women in America to women in India to women who are Dalits, how do they all rally? What is the rallying point? It's so difficult for them to, get liberated because there's no easy way for them to even come together because their lives are tied to different minority groups, whereas they themselves are not a minority. We've discussed the implications of things like these and a lot of these issues. And as I've said right in the beginning, we've tried to make very bold points. We've discussed this in a very balanced way. We've not tried to take positions which are extreme. And we've tried to take, balanced positions on what we think is the right way. Sometimes, there are no shortcuts. We've talked about, should every company pursue diversity? Should every company look at diversity in the same way? A company that's operating in, let's say, in some part of Karnataka and only catering to consumers who speak Kannada, is it not okay if they advertise that Kannada speaking people only can apply? Or if people are, if a job requires a person to work a night shift or do some things which are difficult for somebody else, for a woman, is it not okay if the company advertises that, women can only work in night shift, only men can apply? There's so many things. There was Zomato announced a period leave. Right? Barkha Dutt jumped on that. There was a huge debate on Twitter. So these are all interesting topics on which we've taken a position. We've taken, how they should be dealt with, avoiding all the noise. Because what has happened is that while inclusivity and inclusion in society has kept increasing, I think in the last 40 years, humanity has made such amazing progress that people like me who were born in an era when all this had not happened, for us, it is such a big change. For me, my mother was not liberated. It was perfectly okay for her to just go along with her husband, toe the line of her husband and everything. And today things are so different. But also it makes you sad a little bit, to see that social media is a double-edged sword. So social media is also creating polarization and exclusion on such a big scale. Small issues get blown out of proportion because people can, comment anonymously. They actually end up, making very vulgar comments, creates even more exclusivity and animosity. So while social media has helped some groups to come together for good things, it's also creating a lot of exclusion and lack of tolerance. So we must all be aware of all that's happening around us before we take, some easy positions. With this, I'll stop, Augie, and then we can open it up for discussions. Hello, Augie, can you hear me?
Yeah, wonderful insights, sir.
Hari,
Thank
thank
you
you.
so much. Yeah, go ahead, dog. Yeah, sorry.
No, go ahead, sir. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I think it's a wonderful insight you really brought in. I think really you touched the pulse of the whole subject in terms of how important it is, and the kind of challenges and total inclusion. I think is a very, very fundamental thing. But the kind of challenges that we have in bringing that kind of diversity, and I think what organizations and corporates should do, and some of the live examples what you quoted, definitely, sir, it's all very, very practical. So what I understood is it's not just a book. It is more of a practical wisdom and makes
Yeah.
everybody think by themselves. You don't
Yes.
try to give an advice,
Yeah.
but I think what I could really see is it is more of a kind of a practical wisdom one can get going through the book. And I think the significance of today, we are talking about a 5 trillion economy and a 10 trillion economy in the next 10 years. It's all humbug if we don't look at the diversity. And when I was just talking about even the example of Japan and other countries of aging population and lack of women participation, I think this is going to be the real hottest subject in the next decade. And I think it's a wake-up call. I think the book, what you've written, is a kind of a wake-up call. If organizations and the society and the nation as a whole, I think if we don't take it very seriously, I think definitely we can't hit any right solutions. Therefore, the kind of issues you deliberated today, sir, really very practical. And I would urge all the people to read this book and keep referring it from time to time. And organizations also should have this great book. So once again, really thank you. And I think Augie, you can take it through a Q&A session. I think a lot of questions people are raising their hands. So I think we should take it through the Q&A session. You would be moderating, right? Hello. Some
Augie,
issues.
you're on mute in case you're
Oh, yes,
speaking.
Augie is in mute.
Yeah, thank you. Satish Kumar, please unmute yourself and ask your question, please.
Hari, thanks for your insight. Wherein a lot of passion in what you were talking. Like I think like this itself drives all of us to initiate this process at various organizations. So I represent a hotel company, like wherein like as an industry, it is quite challenging to get resources to have diverse workforce. But however, like keeping the limitations and keeping the industry as a knob, like wherein we strive extremely hard. Like maybe one like so your insight in terms of like how we can attract more women working at the hotel industry, like what do you suggest?
So I can just give you a little bit about what I have experienced. So Big Basket is a company that employs a large number of blue collar workforce. We also have a good number of white collar workforce that work in corporate functions, but in the regions working in the warehouse, we have a large number. So I think at the warehouses, I think what really we've done is that we've done some basics, and that's what I've really focused on, which is get your basics right and solve the problems that are relevant. Don't do the fluff stuff. So we realized that at the warehouses, it was important to create a harassment-free workplace. Absolutely, not on paper, but in reality, because these women come from a certain socio-economic background where they won't even understand that they should complain. They will never have the courage to even complain against a male superior. So what we did was we created a wonderful policy, but every company has a policy and that is immaterial. We communicated that extensively, regularly communicate. The day a woman joins us as a packer in the fruits and vegetables section in Indore, somebody will reach out to her and tell her what her rights are, what are the phone numbers of the internal complaint committee members, and the business head of the region will meet her in front of everyone so that everyone knows that nobody is to play around. That's number one. We considered internal complaints committees which are very high caliber, which are investigate. They have the know-how to conduct investigations are conducted very swiftly in a very fair manner. We have external representation in every investigation, somebody from outside who is a woman of repute, so that it also keeps people in the internal complaints committee honest. It keeps the management honest. So we got people of repute, women of repute from outside, who will never accept to doing anything wrong. The other thing that we've done, is that swift action wherever something has been proven, irrespective of the consequences to business. We have taken very swift action. So we've just got some of these things right. And in the process, we also realized that there are so many complaints which don't constitute sexual harassment, which is a good thing actually, because women are realizing they can complain. And many of those are about simply harassment, sexism, misogyny, and a lot of other things which are lack of understanding, a nuanced understanding of what is a personal space for a woman. So many of these things also come under sexual harassment. So this actually is helping us recreate some of the vocabulary, understand the nuances better, communicate. So coming back to your specific question, I think you need to figure out what kind of workforce exists. If it's a blue collar kind of a workforce, I think it must be a place where they can come and work with dignity like anybody else. Nobody should have the guts to do anything which is wrong. So I think they should be under the protective umbrella of your hotel. So I think that's the first thing. If you're looking at white collar workforce with career ambitions, then I think it's very important to get a critical mass of women into the workforce, because it's not sufficient to say we're an inclusive company. We've created an inclusive environment, because women who want to join your hotel or your company will always want to know. They want to see the proof of the pudding. Does this company employ people like me? Or are they just saying they will take 10 years to employ people like us? In the meanwhile, they will just be inclusive. So you just need to get a critical mass of women leaders. And having said that, I think the most important is the right kind of an attitude. See, the point is that in your hotel business, if you believe diversity is truly important, make it happen. If you don't believe it's really important, you can do without it, then don't do any charade. But if it's important, go the whole hog in ensuring that you get the talent from the entire pool.
Thank you, Ari. It was a great insight in terms of how to drive it. Like, thank you.
Thanks.
And actually, the hospitality sector has employed women extensively, right?
And in fact, as an industry, as my hotel, if I have to talk about, so we are about 20%, like maybe one, like we wanted to have this culture of having 50-50, like that is the driving factor, like very like a lot of, as an industry, like maybe if you talk about any hotel, you don't see more than 20% or maybe 25%, like that is the benchmark what most of the hotels have set for themselves. So across other countries, maybe be it Asian countries, there is diversity, which is like little higher in number, but in India, like as such, like I don't see beyond 20% where any hotel can have their diverse ratios. Uh, However, like that is not the limitation of looking at the future trends and in terms of we having to be surviving in the industry. So there should be some kind of benchmarking which has to arise from the industry. So that is where we are trying to see from other industries what do they practice. Example, your entry level, like if you have people from entry level, whether you have a different scales salary structure for them, like whether you are being factoring the expenses for them in terms of higher compared to a male colleague. Like example, your entry level salaries might be little higher from the male colleagues. Like is it something which you practice, like so that I know, like I can take an example of an industry where I can go back and look at and draw a drawing board plan wherein I can propose something based on the current practices in various industry where you have more diverse people working in your workplaces. That's the entire purpose of it.
Interesting. Thank you so much.
Augie, can I just add one thing to
Yeah,
Satish, what he's kind of speaking? So I represent Zivame. Obviously, more than 50% of our workforce is women. You know, like we kind of women run our stores. So we have like stores which are 100% run by women. Okay, I think so. It's about creating safe environment where people resonate. You know, see women leaders. Like I actually head the operations. So when I'm at warehouse and I stand there, women feel much more safe and they kind of come. So and then it's kind of spreading the word, right? More people tell that they are more employee friendly, they are more women friendly. So Hari was telling, we obviously have a lot of pickers who work in our warehouse also in terms of kind of picking. So it's actually a lot. What we have seen is action really speaks more, louder than words. So if you
Yes.
demonstrate an action, you see more women, they attract more women, and they kind of come. And as much as people say that networking is important, even at that level, what I've seen is the word of mouth, where people really talk more, say, let's go and work there. So instead of
Yeah.
the warehouse, which is next to, let's go and work there, which kind of gives them a much more safer environment. Your policies are more friendly. We give them time, we start shifts which are a little bit later for them. So, we don't ask them to come at 7. We tell, okay, 9 o'clock shift, you kind of start. We kind of do those things so that they are able to attend to their families and also kind of come there. So I feel you need to be having a flexible approach to the whole thing. And that's when you promote. And at the same time, men also have to acknowledge and appreciate, saying that why that is being done, so it should not be that it is discriminating to the women, but at the same time, they need to feel and appreciate that the organization is supporting this going forward. So it's about how you communicate there also, So when everybody, so we do this one voice, one team, one voice kind of, sessions, and you should see the energy, what really kind of comes out there. So I just feel it's about action and how you can keep on demonstrating it rather than just, saying like you do policy, you put it there. It's about how you can demonstrate it also, I just wanted to just add this. Yeah.
Yes, completely agree.
Thank you for that insight, Lavanya. And I have a question on the chat from Rajendran Subaya. He says, how do you handle the false complaint?
See, these are all questions that we have dealt with extensively in the book, because these are all, I would say, typical FAQs. So the one way of looking at it is that, you know, why have we even reached this kind of a situation? We are in a terrible situation where there is, harassment on a very wide scale. If you ask any woman, have you been harassed at least once? I think every woman says that, including the Prime Minister of New Zealand, Jacinda Ardern, was asked this question. She said, who hasn't been harassed at least once? So I think this is widely prevalent. So when you put a solution for a problem of this nature, then you must be prepared to handle some of those consequences. And some of those consequences could be that there could be a bunch of false complaints. But here is my experience. False complaints are truly minimum. They're very rare, very extremely rare. So I would say that we need to figure out ways of dealing with that rather than being too worried about what will happen if there are false complaints. I'm not at all worried about that. But I would be thinking about, how to deal with that. So I think it's about having a fair investigation process, looking at the right kind of evidence, looking at circumstantial evidence as far as possible, all of that, before taking some of your decisions. So I think that's the case. Why sexual harassment? There could be false complaints in any civil case. There could be a false complaint that, somebody beat me up and I could go to court. There could be a false complaint about so many things. So I think the law is not dealing with false complaints for the first time. I think the law has dealt with the tendency to make false complaints for as long as law has existed. So I think there's nothing new at all. So I think it's eminently possible to handle within the framework of a fair investigation.
Thank you, Hari. And if anybody has any questions, please unmute
One
yourself
more
and ask.
point on the manufacturing industry, sir, I would like to add. See, now there is increasing women participation even in the manufacturing sector.
Yes.
Which is conventionally, thought as a kind of a silo. So when I look at this, even in developing economies like Indonesia, or Philippines, or Thailand, I'm able to see a lot of, in fact, in India also, especially in the assembly lines, definitely there is a huge participation now. Especially I've seen many companies, automobile companies using women workers for assembly line and also for inspection purpose. And now slowly I'm seeing with the advent of CNC machines, the unskilled operations, even that is getting extended to the machining line as well. And one more advantage I could see is their participation makes a very friendly IR climate. But my
Correct.
associate vice president of IR is here.
That's a brilliant point.
It's, what I've seen is the labor negotiations become very smooth.
Brilliant
There
point.
is a women leader. And
Correct.
they're shy to talk about unfair points, and they try to project themselves as the kind of true warriors. That kind of scenario is happening. So many organizations. The other day I was talking to the chairman of KEA, Karnataka Employees Association, Mr. Prabhakar. He was also opening the same thing. I think organizations are increasing the HR manpower and IR manpower using women leaders, which is a very good thing. And third interesting thing that is happening pro-COVID, sir, because now people are also working from home, so the barrier is already broken now. It doesn't matter. In fact, the women is more popular because, in front of them, they do the household also, they are used to, and they do the office work also. So the men look quite weak. So which means men needs empowerment now post-COVID. Jovially, I'm telling, I think this is going to be a very strong catalytic factor going forward taking our country to a more prosperous nation. Therefore, a lot of positives happening, and definitely time is going to come that, as you rightly said, it's not minority. It's in fact 50-50. So they are the equal, two sides of the same coin. And therefore, I think once we realize that, and Lavanya rightly put it, flexibility. I think that eye of flexibility is very important. How to empathize with them. In fact, I see some organizations saying, women means they give some concessions. Some leaders treat them equally. I think it's important that flexibility and balancing is very, very important. Emphasizing with that kind of nature of activities. And I'm sure this will really take things much forward, sir. Sir, do you have any point suggestions in your book, post-COVID? What kind of scenarios are likely to emerge given the kind of current situation?
We haven't addressed post-COVID specifically as such.
Right. Okay. Just a thought from my side.
Big Basket has thrived during COVID. That has not been addressed.
Not in this book. Yes, Big Basket has certainly thrived.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of content for part 2, Hari, post-COVID, that is coming out of this discussion. Naresh, I'll take this last question. He says, with so much on LGBTQs getting inclusive more and more, will the workplace or POSH acts sustain? I think the answer to that is that the POSH Act specifically addresses women and women's safety in the workplace. So LGBTQs are not do not get addressed under the POSH Act. But however, there's the other act also, right? Article 371, I think, right? That addresses this particular constituency. And it's also there under Indian law, right? In terms of equality and freedom of speech and expression and everything else. So I suppose POSH should not be applied for this constituency, but we look at the other constituencies, Naresh. Thank you. So with that, I think we are past the hour and we have to turn it over to Lavanya, who has something to say.
Yeah. Thanks, Hari. Thank you so much for taking out time today. Actually, it was really interesting. And while we were on the thing, I've already ordered the book to be delivered.
Very
I
efficient.
really want to kind of read because I really feel that you have challenged the diversity definition for us very differently. I really like that quote, what you said, saying that I am right, but how do I know I'm right? So a lot of definitions on diversity, what we think is correct, so what is my key takeaway is about whether we are creating equal opportunities for everyone. It is about giving equal opportunities for everyone, and how do we kind of make best out of it. There is no debate on whether women need to be at workplace and they need to be kind of promoted, but it is just about how do you create that equally, and what are the socio-economic things which are like really playing a factor on having women at work, and what are those which the organizations need to be clear about as we kind of progress, and also as a woman, I really want to know what are those challenges which I will face, or what I need to kind of address as part of the organization. I really thank you for your time, and also Augie for getting you to this platform. It was really yeah. I think so. We were spellbound. A couple of things what we really heard. Some experts. It has really intrigued me to really go and read the book, and I know I'm sure that most of the audience is also kind of related to the book, in more than one way. So people would have experience. So it really give us a perspective to look at it very differently than what we have read in papers or actually formed opinions on. So thank you so much for your time, and I thank even the BCIC team to kind of put this together at such a short notice. And I hope everybody enjoyed the session. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lavanya. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Mr. Parashurama, and thank you, Augustus.
Yeah.
Welcome,
Thank you.
Hari.
Then the
Take care.
felicitation, Prithvi.
Yes, sir. So before we could wind up, we'd like to thank Mr. T. N. Hari for this wonderful presentation you've done. And then definitely there are a lot of things to take home for our members. And as a token of appreciation from the chamber and from the office bearers and from the chair and co-chair of the HR and Women Committee, we like to felicitate with a memento, which we will see that it reaches your home or your office.
Thank you.
And after
Thank
which,
you.
Augustus sir will also have a national anthem played, sir.
Sure.
Yes, sure, please.
जनगण मन अधिनायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता पंजाब सिंध गुजरात मराठा द्राविड उत्कल बंगा विंध्य हिमाचल यमुना गंगा उत्कल जलधि तरंगा तव शुभ नामे जागे तव शुभ आशीष मांगे गाहे तव जय गाथा जन गण मंगल दायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता जय हे जय हे जय हे जय 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 हे
Thank you all. Thank you once again.
जनगण मन अधिनायक जय हे भारत.
Thank you, Hari. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Take care, everybody.
Thank
Stay
you, sir.
safe.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot.